All right, this recording started. Mr. Gilbert, I would like to thank you for your participation here today. This is a great honor for us. Pardon?
My pleasure.
This is a real pleasure for us to have you here because you are one of the people who actually helped kickstart the entire industry. If I may ask, you wear multiple hats: video game designer, programmer, producer, storyteller. This is a huge list, and you're not a jack of all trades. You're a master of many of these, if not all. What title, what description would you give yourself?
I would say if I had to have one label, it would be game designer.
Game designer. That's great. That's great. We will return to that later on, because we really need to show the new generation where they go from here. And what better than to ask the people who really kickstarted this? So my understanding, you started from the early years of the early video home computers, and with the Commodore 64, there was a lot of debate there with the Microsoft rise of the BASIC. But you co-developed an extension to the Commodore 64 BASIC, where you redefined the graphics and you enabled better use of the machine as a for graphic design and gaming. May I ask, what was the rationale behind that?
Well, I mean, the rationale was I had a computer before I got my Commodore 64. It was a CPM machine, and it had fairly limited graphics, but I could do graphics on it. And then I got the Commodore 64, which had really nice graphics, but they were very, very difficult to access. And it seemed to me that I wanted to be able to do a lot of really fun graphics in a much easier way than the Commodore 64 was allowing me to. And I just started disassembling the ROM of the Commodore 64 and understanding how the basic interpreter worked. And from that, I realized I could actually modify it and modify the basic interpreter and add all these graphics commands to it to do stuff. And I just started to do that. And I think that was just more fun for me to do than it was anything else. But I eventually sold Graphics Basic to a company, and they hired me soon after, and that was really my entrance into the game industry.
Oh, thank God for that, because we received one of the most prominent developments in graphic games. Since the early games where we started using computers, programming languages and the easier ways to program the computers were really essential for creating the new generation of game programmers. How much do you think work such as yours has contributed to this generation of early youngsters, let's say, working with computers, influence them to go into the industry and create their own games?
I think the work that I did with programming languages like Graphics Basic or SCUMM or any of these other things, but probably had very little effect. Those were very, especially SCUMM was very much a tool used by game developers, by companies, and it really didn't have any kind of reach beyond that with people. There certainly is a lot of people may play games that I do or other people do and become inspired by those and go, wow, I would love to make a game like that. I would love to make an adventure game, or I would like to make a Doom clone or whatever. And that really inspires people to then learn how that thing was made, right? It's not magic. And as soon as they start to understand and delve deeper into it, they understand, oh, I could probably make one of these.
Okay. Oh, I'm glad that you mentioned SCUMM, because my main question comes from the early adventure games, and we had the pleasure of having an interview with Roberta Williams as well, one of the first people to create graphic adventure games. This is something I also asked Mr. David Fox. Why adventure games? Why did you focus on adventure games? Thank God that you did. Having played your games and loving your games, how come you focused on adventure games?
Well, I think there were a couple reasons for that. When I was in junior high school, I really wanted to go to film school, and that was the thing I was going to go do. Was I was going to go to film school and I was going to make movies. And then when I got to high school, I really got into computers quite a bit. And computers kind of gave me this interesting creative outlet. So a lot of what I wanted to do with film, was tell stories. And I kind of realized with these games, I can also tell stories. And it just became a different creative outlet for me. Then, when I got the job at Lucasfilm, you're at a company like Lucasfilm that's a movie company, and it is just stories are just in its DNA. And so I think it made a lot of sense for a lot of us, in the Lucasfilm Games Group to pursue some kind of interactive narrative. And I think the most prominent form of interactive narrative at the time was adventure games.
This is thanks for that, because you really pushed the specific genre in a lot of directions, and the entire industry. I think that it credits you with the development of the cutscenes in video games. Is it something you agree with?
Well, yes and no. There were cutscenes in games before Maniac Mansion. There were little interstitials that would happen, or the opening to the game and things like that. But the actual name cutscene, that was something that absolutely came from Maniac Mansion. So that was a term that we had kind of created at Lucasfilm. The actual name cutscene. So the actual concept of a cutscene, no, but the name of a cutscene, yes.
Okay. With Maniac Mansion, you really differentiate yourself from other attempts at graphic adventure games. First of all, the sprites were much larger. The emphasis were on the characters. The humor was there. Not easy to die in your games, and of course, the SCUMM interface. This is huge. I mean, the SCUMM interface is something that persisted along a lot of your games in the early eras. I mean, I think only Loom was a bit different. And my main question always was, why did you focus the name of the SCUMM interface on Maniac Mansion? Was it maybe an idea that this is a one-off? How come? I think it's a bit strange.
I think it was just that Maniac Mansion was the first game that used the whole kind of 9-verb SCUMM interface, and the whole SCUMM programming language was really created for that game. And having that acronym, script creation utility for Maniac Mansion, it just made sense because that was the first game, that I had done with it.
Okay. Now, for the audience that does not have any earlier experience with the graphic adventures games, we should say that Labyrinth was the first early attempt of removing the parser, but the SCUMM engine was the first one that really did away with the parser, and it was 100% point-and-click adventure game. So this is something that you're the first in the market to do that, and you really revolutionized how graphic adventure games were going to be played from this step onwards. If you disagree with any of this, please let me know.
No, I don't. David Fox was working on Labyrinth. I didn't work on
Yeah,
Labyrinth directly, um,
yeah,
and they'd come up with that thing where the verbs were on like a spinning wheel. That you chose them,
yeah,
and that was definitely a huge inspiration towards the SCUMM thing. And the SCUMM interface was really just about simplification, right? It was simplifying down from a parser. It was simplifying the Labyrinth interface and just putting everything on the screen all at once, so you could see it. And it certainly did like create this entire genre of games. I mean, people still make little adventure games today that have the verbs on the screen, exactly like the Maniac Mansion did. So I mean, there is no doubt that it was incredibly influential, in the development of adventure games going forward.
exactly. This is something that really pushed the genre forward. And while I did learn to type by playing the Sierra games, which I love, I think the user interface that you've got for the Lucasfilms games are unparalleled to anything we've ever played ever since. Um, since we mentioned Monkey Island, one of the main questions I wanted to ask you is this. When you ask people about adventure games today, mainly from my generation or even earlier generations, when you mention this game, point and click adventures, they always say Monkey Island, not King's Quest, which came earlier, not other titles such as The Longest Journey. Why do you think we have this?
I don't really know the answer to that question. Right? I do know that um, when I was building Maniac Mansion, and then I helped David Fox a little bit with Zach McCracken and all this. I
Hmm.
was um, I was kind of formulating these rules of adventure games, right? And I wrote this article for a game design magazine called "Why Adventure Games Suck," and it really kind of went through all of my rules. I think there were 15 of them, rules for building a good adventure game. And Maniac Mansion violated a lot of those rules, right? Because we didn't really kind of understand it at the time. But Monkey Island was the first game that adhered to every single one of those rules. And Monkey Island was kind of a test case in a way for, do these rules work? Can you build an adventure game by following these rules exactly? And I think that made Monkey Island very different. It's a very different game from Maniac Mansion. It's a very different game from a lot of the adventure games that were out on the market, because of those rules that we followed. Monkey Island is also, it's a funny game. It's a comedy. Um, and I think a lot of these things just kind of resonated with people. It was a game that was very playable. It was a game you couldn't die in. It was a game that we tried to be very clear about everything that was going on, and it was also a very funny game. It was a well-written game. I think those things just kind of all come together.
Okay. There was a rumor, this is just a curiosity. There was a rumor about the name of the main character in Monkey Island.
Mhm.
Supposedly, you were saving the files on the Amiga, and it was no name, so just Guy, the extension brush, Guy 2. Is that how the character got his name, Guybrush?
Kind of. Generally, that's true, but for some reason, everybody thinks that we built all this art on the Amiga, and we didn't.
Ah,
Every piece of art
okay,
in Monkey Island was built on the IBM PC. We ported
okay,
the game to the Amiga, but it was not a machine that we used to do art at all. I think in the games group, we had one Amiga, that kind of
okay,
sat in the corner that we play games on. And it wasn't, but it was not a workhorse for us at all. So
okay.
the way that Guybrush got his name was, the art was all done in a program called Deluxe Paint.
Ah,
And
okay.
when you would grab a little section of an image, it was called a brush. And so Steve Purcell, who was doing the art at the time, he would create these little images for what Guybrush would look like. And we didn't have a name. He was just called Guy. He was the guy, right? And so Steve would save these off as Guy Brush. Then it would be .lbm because the extension on PCs was only 3 letters, and the extension for Deluxe Plane was LBM for a brush. So he would save these files called guybrush.lbm, and he would give these to me. All day long I would look at these things, and just seeing that file name over and over and over, that's where I kind of got the idea that we should call him Guybrush.
That's an interesting story for the name. Now, I want to move to the next game, which is also the emphasis of this meeting, and one that really resonates as for my generation, at least. I'm nearing 50, and I started in the 80s with the Atari ST and the Amiga and the Commodore 64. So this game resonates with mostly with my age group. My first question with this game is what, of course, we're thankful for that. What brought you back to not only a game that we loved to play in the 80s, but also to the same style, graphic style? What was the rationale behind that?
I think a lot of it came because, I was talking to Gary Winnick, who did all the art for Maniac Mansion, and we were just talking one day about, we should create a new adventure game that was very much in the same line as Maniac Mansion was, in terms of how it was designed and the graphics and the look of it. And then as we started talking about this more, then we decided, well, let's do a Kickstarter for the whole thing. But it really did come from that genesis of creating a game that kind of had that Maniac Mansion style graphics. Like if you look at the graphics of Thimbleweed Park, it's not Monkey Island, right? It's not the way Monkey Island is laid out. It's not any of that, but it's very kind of Maniac Mansion, kind of brought into a modern sense. And so that really came from me talking to Gary, and it's kind of almost reminiscing about how fun Maniac Mansion was to build, and wanting to kind of see if we could do it again. I can't hear you. Your audio is muted.
Apologies for that. The microphone was off. For my generation, seeing a game that really brings memories was something huge. I mean, wow! It's the best. You see this game and you say, "Wow!" And immediately, from all the games that I have played from LucasArts, from all the games, obviously it reminds us a lot the X-Files with Mulder and Scully. But the first time I saw it, the first time I played it, Maniac Mansion came to mind immediately. No other game. Maniac Mansion. Was that deliberate?
Yeah, I think so. Gary's art style in Maniac Mansion was the characters had these very large heads, and his rationale for that was that so much of a personality of a person comes through their face and their head. And Gary's done a lot of comic books, and he's kind of well versed in that. And so he, when he did the Maniac Mansion characters, we were also dealing with very low resolution for the Commodore 64. So the bigger the heads got, we could actually put eyes and mouths and noses and all these facial features on them and get the personality of the characters out if they had big heads. So the Maniac Mansion characters had these big giant heads. And as Gary and I started to put together Thimbleweed Park, we realized, no, if this is kind of going to be a spiritual successor to Maniac Mansion, they really have to have these big heads. It's just part of that defining art style of Maniac Mansion. So I think that's the thing that people key off of the most when they see Thimbleweed Park and they think of Maniac Mansion. It's the big headed characters.
Yeah, and this is easily recognizable. I mean, this style, and this is something that really takes it back to its roots, because it was all started with Maniac Mansion, and now we have seen a game that resembles that. It's like paying tribute to that. At least that's how my generation and the people that I talk to with my generation, they have seen Thimbleweed Park. Strangely enough, my son is 16 and he's more keen to playing Thimbleweed Park, whereas my daughter is 13 and she's more interested in the Return to Monkey Island. I don't know.
Why do you think that is?
Pardon?
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I love both for different reasons. They haven't told me why they prefer that, but they're very keen. I don't know. Maybe it's the story. Maybe it's the graphic style. I don't know. May I ask here? Do you know how well Thimbleweed Park, with obviously the retro graphics, are a bit, should I say, risky with the younger generation that are accustomed to high resolution graphics? Do you have any data about the demographics that play Thimbleweed Park?
I don't have any hard data on that to know what that is. I think Thimbleweed Park is a very nostalgic game. When I set out to do Return to Monkey Island, I mean, one of the very first things that Dave and I talked about was, do we do it as pixel art? Do we do it as a pixel art game that really harkens back to, Monkey Island 1 or 2 or Maniac Mansion or all those old Lucasfilm games? And we really decided not to, because we were a little concerned that if we were to do it as pixel art, it would kind of get pigeonholed into this nostalgia game. And possibly a lot of new players who'd never played Monkey Island before might discard it because it was one of those old pixel games and not really worry about it. Plus, not doing pixel art, it gave us a lot of technological advantages. Doing animation with spine and bones and all this other stuff, and it just made a lot more sense. But I think Thimbleweed Park probably, because it is pixel art, that it probably restricted a little bit of its reach for people.
The other thing that I wanted to ask regarding this is that what really was very interesting, and we'd like to thank you for that. We live in a very peculiar time with all these freemium games that usually they have something to ask you, monetary purchases within games. But you didn't go this way. You gave us Dolores, which is a mini game, completely free, no strings attached, and high quality game. Obviously, we thank you for that, and hopefully other developers will follow your example. The question that goes, it might sound funny, but why? Why create such a mini game of such high quality and then give it away for free?
Well, there were two reasons for Dolores. One was when I started working on Dolores, I knew that I was going to do Return to Monkey Island. Right, that deal had already been it had gone down the path. It was almost a final deal, so I knew I was going to be making Return to Monkey Island, and I knew I wanted to use the same engine that we used for Thimbleweed Park to build Monkey Island. But I knew it needed a lot of improvements, right? There were a lot of things that I wanted to change and upgrade in the engine. So, I used Dolores as a way to build a full game and use that as an excuse to like upgrade the engine for this other secret game that was going to come out, Return to Monkey Island. And the other thing was that, Dolores was built in just the height of the pandemic, right? The pandemic had happened, everything was locked down, people weren't going to work anymore, everybody had to work from home, and it was just a weird time. And that's when I brought David Fox onto the project, and so he and I kind of built this as almost as a thing to do during the pandemic. And so I think those two reasons: one, I wanted to upgrade the engine for Return to Monkey Island, and the second was it just gave us something to do during the pandemic, and also something to give to people during the pandemic, that they go off and play. And it didn't feel like it was probably going to make a lot of money anyway, and so why not just give it away for free?
Okay, well, we really like to thank you for this. It was great effort and great contribution from you, and hopefully we'll see more of this in the future. Now, with Thimbleweed Park out, are there any? Personally, I have to admit that I haven't finished the game yet. Unfortunately, my time in playing is so limited, and I have to juggle between work, the museum, teaching, playing Thimbleweed Park, playing Return to the Monkey Island, playing Colossal Adventure. I haven't finished it, but should we expect a sequel to the game?
It's something that I've been thinking about. I've got a lot of notes about a Thimbleweed Park sequel, but nothing really firm. Right? They haven't really. It's a bunch of ideas, and they haven't really solidified down into an actual game yet. And until they kind of do that, it's hard to say, right? Because I come up with 10 ideas a year for games, and 9 of them go absolutely nowhere, and so it's really hard to say whether it would. But I've definitely been toying with it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully this is not the last of this game that we see, but I have more questions on that later on in this interview. Now, Thimbleweed Park was an incredible game. It was a return back to basics for us. It was something that really touched the nostalgia, but also brought something really fresh that we cannot locate it. We cannot identify it. Something really fresh in the games. And the very fact that you use retro graphics was amazing, and really loved it. But then you went many steps further, and you returned to Monkey Island. And this actually, if I'm not mistaken, it started almost as an April Fool's Day joke, right? Hey, I'm doing a new Monkey Island game. And then you amazed everyone. And wow, oh my God. This, I have to admit, the first time I saw the trailer and the first time I launched it on my Switch, it really got me very excited. Just a comparison. I'm also a fan of science fiction, and yesterday I saw the latest Star Trek Picard episode where they find.
I haven't seen it yet. Don't spoil it.
I'm not saying anything, but okay. Every episode, it's something. It hits you with strong emotions. So the first time I saw the website, the interactive website you created, the logos, the graphics, the first time this launched on my Switch, I cannot begin to describe the emotions. You're on the top of the mountain, and you have the same conversations you had with the same old guy on one of the first games, Secret of Monkey Island. Say, oh my God, this is something different, but this is something so familiar. So familiar. It really was something huge for all us, the earlier generation that started with your games, that started with Monkey Island. It was something fantastic. And I have to ask this. How much did the acceptance and the success of Thimbleweed Park influence your decision to return to the Monkey Island, or it was two different things?
Yeah, I think they were two different things. I certainly gained a lot of experience from Thimbleweed Park, and I would learned a lot from Thimbleweed Park. And a lot of that kind of knowledge, always moves forward to any game you do in the future, right? You're always bringing experience in the past forward. And so there certainly were a lot of things with Thimbleweed Park or with Return to Monkey Island that were influenced by, the design and writing and everything of it. But, I don't know that there's any kind of direct really relationship between the two games. Like, I think if Thimbleweed Park had never happened, Return to Monkey Island still could have happened, so I don't think one is really dependent on the other specifically.
Yeah. One very important thing, Thimbleweed Park uses the interface that we're used to playing, and this was my generation. However, with the Return to Monkey Island, you use, I wouldn't say simple, I would say more optimized for this younger generation interface, which is huge. I mean, this is the way that all the keys are mapped on the keypad, and you can just click the buttons to select actions and everything. This is something that was, in my imagination, it was optimized for the younger generation, which are used to a more simple way of interacting with the games. Is this assumption correct?
Yeah, I mean, Thimbleweed Park used the verb interface that we've seen in the SCUMM stuff really for nostalgia reasons, right? The whole point of the Kickstarter of Thimbleweed Park was it's kind of like you found this old game from 1989 that you'd never played before, and so it really was kind of tying into the nostalgia, whether it's the big heads of the Maniac Mansion characters or the verb interface. But with Return to Monkey Island, we didn't want the game to be stuck in nostalgia, right? We didn't want this game to be, oh, it's just an old adventure game from the 90s. We wanted it to be something that was new and modern. And I think the interface is one of those things. I think it's one of the first things that you really need to look at. And before Maniac Mansion, there was, the Sierra and the parser and all this stuff. And, we took a lot of leaps forward with the verb interface in the SCUMM system. But, I don't want every game to be like that for the end of time, right? There was a big leap from Sierras to Maniac Mansion. And then there's other people are taking leaps now doing different things. And we really wanted to take a leap. And part of the philosophy behind the SCUMM interface was that you shouldn't be guessing what you're doing, right? You shouldn't have to type things in and try to guess what word something was. You knew you wanted to open the door, so you click on open. If you knew you wanted to push something, you would click on push. And I think the Return to Monkey Island interface is one step further in that. And you just saw the choices right on the screen, and they were laid out not as like push door, but it was actually what Guybrush was thinking at that moment. That is why he wanted to push the door. That was what became the sentence line for the stuff. And so to me, that's just kind of an evolution. And I do think that modern players or the younger generation or whatever you want to say, I think they are kind of used to a different way of interacting with games, and you do need to kind of stay current with that stuff. You can't always drag them back in time to do something. you have to let them drag you forward in time to do something that is interesting.
Regarding the playability of these games and the ease of use and the interface use, it's amazing. But as a teacher, I have been using educational software for quite some time now. One of the main problems that I see with many educational programs or edutainment titles is that the message is there, the content is there, but the user interface usually is so lousy that the children have problem interacting with the content. Whereas with games such as yours, I mean, you've set a lot of the rules in the industry on how to create games that are very easy to get into very easily and to interact directly with the story, interact directly with the entire content. So I wish the educational industry paid a lot more attention to what you've been doing here with the ease of use of your games. And since we mentioned Sierra, I do believe that the later Sierra games, when they went into a complete point and click based system, they were definitely, I mean, that's my opinion, influenced by what you were doing. I don't know if you have any insight or if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think they were. I think they were influenced, not specifically, from the LucasArts games, but I think they were influenced that is the way the industry is moving. That we were moving away from parsers and away from typing and more kind of visual representation of interfaces. So I think the whole industry was moving that way, and I think they really saw that writing on the wall, and they knew they had to kind of move over to that kind of interface. And I think as games become more widespread, like more and more different types of people are playing them, they have to change. And I think interface is like one of the first ways to do that. And I've always been somebody that's super interested in interface, right? Whether I'm playing a game or whether it's just a website or it's the interface of my watch or whatever, I'm always very frustrated by bad interface design. And so it's just something that has interested me over the years.
Well, this is something that definitely it's a joy for us. And I must say that with most games today, one of my greatest hurdles is to learn the controls and learn how to play with these games, which is one of the reasons that I have little to no patience with most games that are released today. But I have to say this, and I cannot praise it enough. With Thimbleweed Park, it was something that I knew from my younger days. But with Monkey Island, I felt like I could use the interface of the game almost immediately. It was so easy to get into it. So easy to get into it. My only complaint, if I must say, is by highlighting all the important things on the screen. Of course, it does away with one of the main hurdles we had with adventure games, especially from some French developers, that you had to click on the right pixel on the screen to find an important item. However, by doing that, isn't it a bit obvious all the important places in one screen?
Well, I think it's something you have to worry about. I mean, pixel hunting in games is not fun. Yeah. There's certainly, you get gameplay hours for it. You can say your game lasted for 20 hours because most of that time was pixel hunting, which is not fun. But by calling out the objects, I mean, it is something that we even did back in the Monkey Island days, right? Because we would definitely call it objects, but not necessarily by kind of showing the hot spots, but we would call them out in the way that I wanted the artist to draw something, right? They should draw something on the screen that was interesting enough that you wanted to focus on it. And there were a lot of cases, in those games where, an artist like Steve Purcell or Peter Chan would deliver us a room, and we would literally go through the room and point at stuff and say, make this less interesting, make this less interesting, make this less interesting, because those things were fun to look at, but they were distracting the player from things that they can actually do. So it's something we kind of dealt with back then, but I think with a modern game where you can't see all the hot spots, like I think modern players would rebel against that, right? If they couldn't click on something and see all the hot spots. What that does make you do, though, is it makes you need to make your design better. Because if your puzzles only work because people don't know the object is there, that's a bad puzzle. And so by just saying, look, we're going to show you where the hotspots are, it makes us make better puzzles, because we can't hide that information from people.
Well, these are very important things. A lot of my friends who are into video game development, even here in Cyprus, I'm quite sure they're going to appreciate all these very interesting suggestions and advice coming from you. Now, let's go to the last part of this interview. I'm mainly an adventure game player. I really love adventure games, and that's how I started with my first computer, and that's the genre I prefer. However, for the past more than 1 decade, and I think the last major game that was released with a major fanfare was Grim Fandango, if I remember correct. There was a lot of talk about the industry regarding graphic adventure games and dying, and it's dead, even though there are titles still being released. And I don't know what's your take on that regarding the genre. Is it really dead, or has the market moved its emphasis to other types of games?
Well, I think if you broaden the question, right, because I don't necessarily like adventure games. I like narrative games. I
Okay.
like games that are telling a story. And adventure games happen to do that. But I think what happened was there are a lot of really bad adventure games came out. And I think that they just kind of gave the whole point and click genre a real stigma. That, if you see a point and click game with the interfaces and all those trappings, you immediately think of the bad old days of adventure games where you had ridiculous puzzles with moon logic that made no sense and randomly combining objects. And it's just kind of this stigma that you have to get over. But narrative games are alive and well right now. I mean, there are so many fun narrative games that are out there. And, one of my favorites is like Firewatch, right? Firewatch is not a point and click adventure, but it is an adventure game, right? It is a narrative game. And so no, I don't think adventure games are dead at all. I think kind of the old style point and click games are a very niche game right now. They're not dead. People are still making a lot of those things and they're still somewhat successful, but they are very, very much a niche game. Where just narrative games in general, there's a lot of really good narrative games out there. So no, I mean, adventure games might be dead, but narrative games are far from dead. And I think what adventure games need to do is they need to just shed all of those old tropes that people seem to completely fixate on when they're building an adventure game, and kind of move to the future. Look at very successful games like Firewatch and go, well, that's a narrative game, that's an adventure game. Why was that super successful when my little scum type game was not? And people just need to look at that stuff, because that's what's interesting, right? I'm not interested in remaking games I did a long time ago. I'm interested in making new games that try new things, that have new interfaces, that have new ways that you interact with the story. That's interesting, and adventure game designers need to embrace that.
Well, thank you for this clarification. This is very important. And in the past few years, again, I have to talk about my generation, and of course, it resonates to the new generation as well. We've seen games coming from major developers like you, with Thimbleweed Park, and now with Return to Monkey Island. We've seen Roberta Williams returning to the game that started her career, Colossal Cave Adventure. Now there are rumors, probably we've got a new Space Quest game coming out. Would it safe to say that we can expect a resurgence from the original developers who created the industry coming back, but with new births of game? Or is this something that maybe it's a one-off? Obviously, you have to speak about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're going to have this resurgence of people who design those games, I think that they're only going to be successful if they actually innovate going forward, right?
Yeah.
If all they want to do is just rehash stuff that was done in the past, which, to be honest, Thimbleweed Park is to a lot of degrees. I mean, it was built for a very specific nostalgic reason. But I think if we're going to if designers are going to move forward, they're really going to have to innovate and change, right? It's like, I don't want to play another Space Quest game that is just like the other Space Quest games built in the 1990s. I want to play a brand new Space Quest game that is really showing me new and different things, showing me a different way to look at the world and look at the characters. And I think that's really important, right? It's there's the whole adage that sharks have to keep swimming, or they're going to die. And I think that's true of creative people as well. It's like, we need to keep innovating, we need to keep pushing forward, we need to keep trying new things. I mean, the whole SCUMM interface, back in 1989 came about because we were trying new things, right? We could have just built a parser game. Maniac Adventure could have been that. But we were pushing forward and building new things, and we shouldn't stop with that interface. We should keep pushing forward always, everything we do.
Well, I'm really glad you put it this way, because to be honest, personally, the nostalgia part of me was satisfied when I saw Thimbleweed Park with its graphics and its humor. But what I really really loved, was that you returned to Monkey Island in a completely revamped way. Some scenes, they brought us back to that first time we saw the game, and we fell in love with that. But that was it. It was a brand new, incredibly new game, a fresh game. I mean, I cannot begin to describe my feelings when I first saw that. And
that was always a difficult thing with Return to Monkey Island, because we knew we wanted to tap into the nostalgia of that, and starting the game on the lookout, talking to the lookout, was kind of a part of that. But we also knew we needed to move into new territory. We couldn't just rehash the old game. We couldn't just have the whole game, be on Melee Island or with all the same characters. And a lot of this, there were a lot of brand new characters in the game, and a lot of the old characters you met, they really had changed, right? They weren't just these carbon copies of their version of them from Monkey Island 1, but they were different. Their lives had changed. Stan's life had changed, and that was really important, right? Because I mean, part of the whole theme of Return to Monkey Island is kind of about things moving forward. It's Guybrush feeling like he's a little bit lost in that world, and it's really about him moving forward as well. And we really need to make sure that we did that with the game, that we had just enough nostalgia, but also something completely brand new.
Yeah, to me, I think that was very brave, but was a move in the right direction. And should we expect you to give us more games, something different? Is there anything in your plans, or maybe something you don't want to disclose right now?
Yeah, probably not now. I'm definitely working on some ideas that I have. I mean, some of them are narrative games and adventure games. Some of them are kind of action RPG type stuff, which I really enjoy playing, right? If you look at the games I actually play, it is a lot of action RPG type stuff. I mean, that's what I really enjoy playing. I love adventure games, and I love and still play a lot of narrative games, but I also like other types of games. And so I'm kind of toying around with a lot of different things right now.
Okay. May I ask, are there any games from other developers that you consider either very important milestone games or games that you're influenced by them?
I think Firewatch is a game that I think is an interesting milestone game, because at its core it is an adventure game and it is a narrative game, but it is so different than stuff that had been made before it, that I have a lot of respect for that game. And I really enjoyed that game, and I really liked playing that game quite a bit.
Okay, thank you for that. And if I may, my final question. Um, you are one of the legends of the industry. I mean, you don't have to be modest with this. You are one of the people who kickstarted the industry. You pushed the animated graphic adventure genre a lot of steps forward. You created a lot of the amazing parsers for the games, a lot of the rules that were followed by the games. And I'm not going to name any games here, but we've seen a lot of games that said, okay, this was influenced by the Lucas games. And you obviously gave us a lot of suggestions and advice earlier. What advice would you give to the young generation who want to get involved in video game development? Those who are about to go to study, or those who are now starting their game development work?
Yeah, I think my advice for that has always been to just make a lot of games. I think the trap that I see a lot of younger people get into is they have this idea in their head for their penultimate game, right? And they become focused on building just that game. And I think what you have to do is you have to build a lot of games. And that's where things like, I think game jams are really, really important, right? So, young people wanting to get, involved in the industry, go do a game jam, because and do as many of them as you can. And you're going to be building a lot of different games, and every game you build, whether it's successful or not, you learn something from that. And if all you do is kind of focus on this one game that you want to build, and maybe you'll build someday, you're never going to gain all that experience. So just build a lot of games, give them to your friends, put them up, on itch.io for free. Just do something so you get that experience of making stuff and absorbing the feedback that comes from making those things.
Okay, this is very interesting advice. Hopefully, people will learn about that, because my personal experience with some of the young developers is that they get really discouraged from something that didn't sell well. So they're even thinking about changing industries. So this advice is very, very important. So they should persevere. They should try and develop more games. So they should aim for materializing their ideas. This is great.
Yeah, it's about honing your craft. You know, if you decide, oh, I want to build a kitchen table, and you go out and it's the first kitchen table you've ever built in your life, it's really going to suck, right? There's no question about that. But don't give up. I mean, just keep trying to build that thing. Keep honing your skills at doing stuff. And so it's not really, the sales aren't important. What's really important is what you learned from the process.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. This was a very, very interesting conversation with us. Again, I want to thank you both as a museum for this interview. It's very important for us. But as a person who grew up with your games, I want to thank you personally for releasing games that really made my childhood so much more interesting.
Well, I'm glad you like them.
I like them because they're so much quality, so great quality. I mean, I have played, I don't know how many adventure games. If I'm going to decide which ones were better, obviously my first adventure games from Sierra, which I loved. The games that you created, Maniac Mansion was the first that my dad brought me. Shark McCracken, I was in love with that. Mankind, something else. And I mean, the only other adventure game that that was not from Lucasfilm that really came close was The Longest Journey. But I'm not quite sure that we would have games like The Longest Journey if Sierra and Lucasfilm weren't there first to really define that specific genre. So I thank you for your contribution in this. This was huge.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for playing it.
I do wish you have many years that are you bring us more games and more titles and more contributions. We really, really, really appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you for this, and I hope we have the opportunity in the near future to do another interview. And if you happen to be in Cyprus, a very nice island here in the Mediterranean, perfect weather, I'm very glad to give you a tour of the museum as well.
All right, great. I may take you up on that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. I would like to wish you, it's morning there. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.